In 1941, the world entered the fiercest phase of World War II. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy realized it needed a torpedo bomber that was both durable and powerful to counter the strength of Japan's naval forces in the Pacific. At that time, Grumman, a renowned aircraft manufacturer, was tasked with developing an entirely new model to replace the Douglas TBD Devastator, which had become outdated and inferior against the rapid advancement of naval weaponry. Within just 1 year, the TBF Avenger project, later renamed TBM Avenger when produced by General Motors, was born. The aircraft was built with a large, sturdy frame, a wingspan of nearly 17 meters, and a spacious torpedo bay. Its defining feature was the ability to carry the Mark 13 torpedo, a fearsome weapon capable of sinking large warships with a single hit. The Avenger's first test flight took place in August 1941 and immediately impressed the U.S. Navy. Despite its bulky frame, the plane demonstrated remarkable maneuverability and extraordinary endurance. Many engineers and test pilots remarked, "It is like a miniature flying fortress, but more agile and born for the sea." On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing America into the war. Just months later, the first Avengers were assigned to newly formed squadrons, ready for combat. Though few in number and not yet fully perfected, the Avenger became the Navy's hope, a weapon that could shift the balance in the Pacific. The Avenger's public debut came on June 4, 1942, the day of the historic Battle of Midway. At the Pearl Harbor Naval Base, a small group of young pilots flew brand-new Avengers into the fight. The results were brutal. Many were shot down in the first wave, but they proved to the world that a new era in naval warfare had begun. After Midway, despite heavy losses, the TBM Avenger proved its potential. The U.S. Navy quickly expanded production lines, making it one of the primary torpedo bombers. Throughout 1942 and 1943, Avengers appeared in growing numbers at bases in Hawaii, Guadalcanal, and across strategic islands of the Pacific. At Guadalcanal, Avengers became the terror of Japanese forces. At first, Japanese soldiers mocked the giant beast, believing its bulky body was an easy target for anti-aircraft fire and agile Zero fighters. But within months, that view changed. Avengers often flew low, skimming just above the waves, using clouds and sea spray to approach targets. When the Mark 13 torpedo dropped from its belly and sped into a ship's hull, devastation followed instantly. Countless Japanese transport and destroyer ships were sunk with just 1 or 2 precise strikes. The Avenger's hallmark was its toughness. Pilots recalled instances where an Avenger returned riddled with bullet holes like a honeycomb, yet still managed to make it back to base. In the cockpit, the windshield cracked, oil spilled across the engine, yet the machine, like a wounded steel beast, refused to fall. This created an unshakable faith among U.S. pilots. If any plane can bring us home after flying through fire, it is the Avenger. The Avenger's peak came in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The U.S. Navy unleashed its massive carrier fleet, with Avengers at the spearhead of the attacks. Squadrons of Avengers, launched from carriers like USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown, armed with torpedoes and bombs. Opposing them was the Japanese fleet, including carriers and heavy cruisers. That bloody morning, waves of Avengers dived like steel storms. Engines roared louder than the sea. Torpedo sights clattered inside cockpits. On Japanese decks, anti-aircraft fire streaked skyward like rain. Tracer rounds, tearing the sky red. Many Avengers erupted in flames, crashing into the sea, yet the survivors pressed their attacks. When the first torpedoes struck Japanese carriers, Hiyo and Shokaku, the ocean exploded into towering columns of water. Fires spread swiftly from fuel stores, turning ships into floating infernos. Japan lost key vessels in an irreplaceable blow. Military historians later admitted the Avenger was one of the decisive weapons that gave the U.S. absolute control of the Pacific skies and seas. But the Avenger's role extended beyond sinking ships. It served as reconnaissance, eyes and ears. Many missions saw Avengers fly hundreds of miles into danger zones to locate the Japanese fleet. Navigators strained over compasses and charts, while gunners scanned the sea for ships. A single report could decide the fate of an entire fleet. In many cases, Avengers not only found the enemy, but guided devastating carrier strikes. One notable memory was that of young pilot George H.W. Bush, later President of the United States. In 1944, at just 20 years old, Bush flew an Avenger during an attack on the Bonin Islands. His plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire and engulfed in flames. Though burning, he held course long enough to release his bombs before bailing out. His two crewmates did not escape. This event deepened the Avenger's tragic heroism. An aircraft that could save lives, but also became a steel tomb for countless brave pilots. In each battle, the Avenger was never alone. It often flew in formation with Hellcats and Corsairs as escorts, but the Avenger always delivered the decisive blow. The Japanese called it the whale plane for its massive frame, but beneath its seeming slowness lay a lethal bite. As the war turned in America's favor, the Avenger appeared more frequently in photos, reports, and documentaries. It was not just a killing machine, but a symbol of U.S. industrial power and will. With thousands produced, it became the most widely manufactured torpedo bomber in history. By late 1945, as Japan surrendered, the Avenger had fulfilled its wartime mission. But its story did not end. A new chapter awaited. In the post-war era, when Avengers continued to fly, no longer in battle, but in training missions, preparing for an uncertain future. And it was in this very period that the Flight 19 tragedy unfolded, turning the Avenger from a symbol of war into a symbol of mystery in aviation history. When the last shots of World War II were fired, the world entered a new era. Japan surrendered. The U.S. became a superpower, and millions of soldiers returned home. But not all shed their uniforms. The Navy retained a massive force, both as a deterrent and as preparation for unknown challenges. In this setting, the TBM Avenger, once the nightmare of the Japanese fleet, did not disappear but served as a training tool. At Fort Lauderdale, Florida, squadrons of Avengers were assigned to train new cadets. These massive aircraft now carried no torpedoes or bombs, but instead bore the mission of teaching navigation, formation flying, and emergency procedures at sea. For young pilots, sitting in an Avenger was both a source of pride and fear. Its vast wingspan, heavy body, and roaring engine made it clear this was not just an airplane, but a true test. Training courses included many standardized exercises. One of these was Flight 19, a long-distance navigation drill over the Atlantic. 5 Avengers took off together, flying a triangular route with set turning points, then returning to base. The exercise sounded simple, but was extremely demanding. At sea, there were no landmarks, only sky and water. Pilots had to trust completely in their compass, charts, and radios. A single mistake could send them into the endless ocean, with no way back. On December 5, 1945, a group of 14 young pilots climbed into 5 Avengers for the Flight 19 exercise. The sky was clear, the sea breeze gentle. No one could imagine it would be a day of destiny. They left the Fort Lauderdale runway with confidence, carrying faith in the Avenger, the very weapon that had brought victory to a nation. But out over the vast ocean, compasses began to spin erratically. Flight leader Lieutenant Charles Taylor repeatedly radioed command, saying he could not determine their position. "We don't know which way is west, which way is east," he reported, his voice tense. The Avenger's toughness and power meant nothing when the most vital factor, orientation, became an unsolvable mystery. Fort Lauderdale's control station sent constant signals, instructing the squadron to head west to find land. But the pilots, confused and losing faith in their instruments, began to argue. Some believed they were near the Florida Keys, others thought they had flown far past the Bahamas. Meanwhile, the sun sank, darkness spread, and fuel ran low. When the final radio messages came, they were scattered and desperate. "We may have to ditch in the ocean. When the fuel runs out, all hands prepare." Then silence. No sound ever came again from Flight 19. To rescue them, the Navy dispatched a PBM Mariner seaplane with 13 crew. But just 20 minutes after takeoff, the rescue aircraft also vanished without a trace. In total, 27 men, 14 trainees, and 13 rescuers disappeared into the void. Their deaths were unlike those in wartime, where bombs and visible enemies claimed lives. This occurred in peacetime, on planes once considered the Navy's most reliable. The incident planted a strange feeling in the public mind. If even the Avenger, the symbol of strength and trust, could vanish, perhaps forces beyond human understanding were at play. From then on, Flight 19 became one of the most famous aviation mysteries of the 20th century, forever tied to the Bermuda Triangle. Fort Lauderdale, once just a modern training base, became remembered as the starting point of the doomed flight. The TBM Avenger, instead of being recalled only as a weapon of war, became part of legend, a testament to both human strength and fragility before nature and the unexplained. More than 70 years have passed, and hundreds of theories have been offered: navigational error, magnetic anomalies, sudden weather, or even supernatural explanations. Yet to this day, no verified wreckage of Flight 19 has ever been found. The mystery remains intact, challenging history, science, and the imagination of humanity. When the U.S. Navy decided to develop the TBM Avenger, the goal was not only to build a torpedo bomber, but to create a new symbol of American industrial power. The world of 1941 had no room for small, fragile aircraft like the TBD Devastator. What was needed was a steel monster, something that could carry torpedoes, weighing tons, fly hundreds of nautical miles, and still be strong enough to return to base, even after being hit by dozens of bullets. The result was the birth of the Avenger, enormous in size, a wingspan of nearly 17 meters, a length of more than 12 meters, and a maximum takeoff weight of nearly 8 tons. Standing on the runway, the Avenger loomed like a giant steel block, intimidating even experienced pilots. Many called it a flying house because its bay was large enough to carry a Mark 13 torpedo, a weapon designed to sink heavy warships. The Avenger's hallmark was its sturdy frame. Grumman, the manufacturer, was famous for its ironworks design philosophy, meaning that a product had to be so durable that nothing could easily destroy it. The Avenger was armored at critical points: the cockpit, the engine, even the fuel tanks. In battle, when anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters rained bullets, the Avenger often endured and kept flying. Some returned to base with fuselages riddled like honeycombs, yet the engine and structure held strong. At the heart of the Avenger was the Wright R2620 Cyclone engine, a 14-cylinder radial, producing over 1,900 horsepower. When started, its deep rumble rolled across the runway like thunder. This engine gave the Avenger a top speed of around 275 knots, not as fast as Hellcats or Zeros, but powerful enough to carry heavy payloads and fly up to 1,000 miles. That balance of strength and range made it the Navy's long-distance cavalry. Inside, the Avenger's weapons bay could carry one Mark 13 torpedo weighing nearly 900 kilograms, or 2,000 pounds of bombs, plus defensive .50 cal machine guns in the tail and top turret. This flexibility allowed the Avenger to strike ships, bomb land targets, and defend itself against surprise fighter attacks. When the first Avenger took off, engineers, mechanics, and pilots all felt they were witnessing the birth of a new generation. Not just a torpedo bomber, but a flying fortress of the sea. A TBM Avenger was never flown by a lone pilot. Inside this massive, flying house was a three-man crew, and it was their coordination that made the Avenger so formidable. At the front sat the pilot, responsible for controlling the entire aircraft, from takeoff and landing to maintaining altitude and speed when lining up a torpedo drop. Behind him, slightly lower, was the navigator and radio operator, the secondary brain of the crew. Eyes fixed on maps, calculating coordinates, and keeping contact with carriers or command. In the cramped rear sat the gunner, manning the .50 cal machine gun, ready to fire at any Zero daring to close in. Despite its bulk, the interior was not spacious. The cockpit was simple but cramped, with panels crowded by gauges and levers. When the engine roared, the whole fuselage shook violently. The noise so loud, the crew could only communicate through intercom. Heat from the engine, the acrid smell of burning oil, and hot metal filled the air. New pilots often felt as if they had stepped into a living machine, every vibration and sound reminding them they were riding a steel beast. In combat, every second of coordination mattered. As the pilot descended to launch a torpedo, the navigator would shout into the intercom, "Hold course 035, maintain 150 knots." The tail gunner swept his weapon, firing bursts at incoming enemy planes. Together they formed a tense rhythm, each man aware that a single mistake could turn them all into a fireball, crashing into the sea. The technique of torpedo release demanded absolute precision. The pilot had to fly just a few meters above the water, keeping perfectly steady while anti-aircraft shells exploded around him. Too fast, and the torpedo shattered on impact. Too slow or too high, and its trajectory missed. Pilots often recalled flying so low that sea spray lashed against the windshield, holding steady until the last second before pulling up to escape. The Avenger was more than a weapon. It was a lifeline. Countless stories tell of Avengers limping home in near ruins, engines scorched, wings full of holes, even missing landing gear. Yet its rugged frame kept it airborne. Many pilots admitted that without the Avenger, they would never have made it back. Its long range was another strength. With huge fuel tanks, the Avenger could patrol for hours across thousands of miles of ocean. In convoy escort or fleet reconnaissance, it became the Navy's all-seeing eye. Navigators had to be masters of math and courage, relying only on compass, sextant, and radio signals. A single miscalculation could doom the entire crew to the endless sea. Even the Japanese came to respect it. They called it the plane that would not die, as many Avengers kept flying despite heavy damage. Reports said some Japanese sailors grew uneasy when Avengers appeared overhead, for it meant a torpedo strike could tear through their ships within minutes. Above all, the Avenger carried human stories. Inside its steel bulk sat young men, many barely out of school, leaving classrooms for war. They sweated in cramped cockpits, hearts pounding as they faced the enemy, yet carried out their missions with determination. They gave the Avenger its soul, turning it from a machine into a living symbol of courage and sacrifice. When World War II ended in August 1945, the TBM Avenger, which had once dominated the Pacific, began a new chapter. No longer carrying heavy torpedoes into blazing battles, the Avenger became a steel teacher, training a new generation of pilots in the post-war era. At Fort Lauderdale, Florida, dozens of Avengers were assigned to training squadrons. Each morning, the runways by the sea rang with engine roars. Young pilots, fresh from school or just back from the front, donned flight suits and climbed into the massive Avengers. This time, they were not preparing for war, but for peacetime missions, patrolling seas, search and rescue, and most importantly, keeping pilot skills sharp for whatever might come. Among the training exercises, Flight 19 was one of the toughest. It was a long-range navigation course over the Atlantic, 5 Avengers flying in formation, making turns at set coordinates. then returning to base. No carrier, no enemy targets, only sky and endless sea. The task sounded simple, but it was a deadly test of navigation. At sea, one small error in calculation could send a squadron into infinity, where fuel ran out and survival was measured in hours. On December 5, 1945, a group of young cadets prepared for the fateful Flight 19. They climbed into 5 Avengers, each lumbering down the Fort Lauderdale runway under the Florida sun. To them, the Avenger was still the undefeated symbol, the plane that triumphed at Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippine Sea. No one imagined that within hours, these proud aircraft would become the center of one of aviation's greatest mysteries. At first, everything seemed normal, but after more than an hour, the tense voice of Commander Lieutenant Charles Taylor crackled over the radio. "Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. The ocean looks strange. I think we've flown too far east." From then on, communications grew chaotic. Some cadets believed they were near the Florida Keys. Others insisted they were over the Bahamas. Control stations in Fort Lauderdale desperately instructed them to fly west to find land. But the Avengers seemed only to drift deeper into the Atlantic. Dusk fell. Ocean winds strengthened. In the cockpits, fuel gauges dropped to danger. These young pilots, facing their first life-or-death trial without bombs or enemies, had to choose: keep flying into hopelessness or prepare to ditch in rough seas. Their last recorded words chilled all who heard them. "When fuel runs out, all hands prepare to ditch. If anyone spots land, report immediately." Then silence. The Navy scrambled a PBM Mariner rescue plane with 13 crew. Yet fate was crueler than anyone imagined. Just 20 minutes after takeoff, the Mariner vanished too, leaving no trace. In total, 27 men, 14 cadets, and 13 rescuers were lost forever. What made the tragedy haunting was the Avenger itself. These were not fragile, flimsy planes. They were famous for toughness, often returning with holes in their fuselages or parts missing. Yet 5 Avengers, 5 flying fortresses, along with a large rescue plane, vanished without a single wreckage, without a body. From then, speculation exploded. Some said Taylor lost orientation and led his squadron eastward into the Atlantic until fuel ran out. Others pointed to magnetic anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle, the so-called death zone that swallowed ships and planes. Scientific theories suggested sudden weather changes or compass interference from solar storms, but all remained speculation. The truth still lies deep beneath the sea, never uncovered. Thus, from a symbol of war, the Avenger entered legend in an unimaginable way. It is remembered not only as the weapon that helped the U.S. Navy win the Pacific, but also as the flying tomb of Flight 19, the mysterious disaster that chilled the world. Today, when people speak of Fort Lauderdale, they recall Flight 19. When they mention the Avenger, alongside its wartime glory, they also remember the haunting mystery. A plane built to inspire trust became an unanswered question, one that continues to fascinate, divide, and haunt generations. A TBM Avenger was never just a giant aircraft, but a 3-man crew bound together in tight unity. Each of them carried an irreplaceable role, and once they sat inside the cabin, the 3 became a single entity, where survival depended on perfect coordination. At the front, beneath the thick windshield and a control panel crowded with dials, sat the pilot. He was the sole keeper of the aircraft, deciding takeoff, adjusting speed, lowering altitude, and bringing the Avenger into the precise position for a torpedo drop. That heavy responsibility often fell upon young men, barely in their 20s, with steady hands and eyes fixed in intense concentration. Behind him, slightly lower in the fuselage, was the navigator radio officer. He acted as the crew's secondary brain. Each time the Avenger flew far out over the sea, with no land to guide them, this officer relied on compass, maps, and radio to keep the aircraft oriented and in contact with carriers or base. While the pilot watched ahead and the gunner scanned the skies, He ensured the team did not stray into oblivion. Finally, in the cramped tail section, sat the gunner, the silent guardian. With his .50 caliber machine gun in the turret, he kept constant watch on the skies behind. Whenever a Japanese Zero appeared from the clouds, it was he who shielded the entire crew. His was the most dangerous role, exposed, with little armor, yet serving as the lifeline for the two men up front. In flight, the three moved as one. The engine's roar made direct conversation impossible, leaving only the intercom to carry their voices. "Hold 150 knots," the navigator barked. "Zero to the left," the gunner shouted. "Prepare for torpedo drop," the pilot replied. Every order, every reaction had to align to the second, for even the slightest delay could turn them into black smoke over the sea. Throughout the war, thousands of such crews took off, and many never returned. But for those who survived, the memory of the three men sharing one cockpit remained the strongest bond. Comradeship forged only in steel, fire, and the shadow of death. On every mission, a TBM Avenger crew was like three interlocking gears, rotating in perfect sync within a massive war machine. Each man had a role, and the success or failure of the squadron hinged on whether the three could merge into one. The pilot, the center of every decision. From the moment the Avenger rolled down the runway, his hands gripped the stick, eyes fixed on the gauges. He knew that even a slight misalignment at takeoff could send the nearly 8-ton plane off balance. Over the sea, he controlled altitude, speed, and the crucial moment to hold steady for torpedo release. The most nerve-wracking moment came when dropping to just above the waves, anti-aircraft fire bursting like rain around him. He knew that holding for 5 more seconds could mean a perfect strike. Those 5 seconds stretched like eternity, heart racing, sweat streaming. Yet he held firm until the word drop came. The navigator radio officer, the living compass, while the pilot wrestled with the plane under fire. He kept one eye on the map and one ear on the carrier's orders. At sea, there were no landmarks, only sky and water. A small directional error could push the squadron hundreds of miles astray. Thus, he was under constant pressure, calculating numbers, checking bearings, urging the pilot to correct course. He was also the only bridge between the plane and the outside world. If the radio failed, the crew was cut adrift in the void. The gunner, the living shield, cramped inside the tail turret, he rarely had rest. The Pacific skies swarmed with Japanese Zeros, fast and aggressive. Each time a black speck appeared in the distance, he had to swing the gun and wait for range. The .50 caliber spat fire, flashes lit the cramped turret, smoke stung his nose. Sometimes the enemy came so close he could see the pilot's face on the other side. A single mistimed pull could let the enemy slip through, dooming all three. In brutal battles like Guadalcanal and the Philippine Sea, these three roles saved one another time and again. Some pilots lived only because the navigator shouted, "Turn left now," before flying into anti-aircraft fire. Others survived because a gunner shot down a pursuing Zero at near point-blank range. Each man was a vital link, and if one failed, the whole chain collapsed. Remarkably, even after the war, the Avenger's 3-man structure remained unchanged in training flights. Though no Zeros or warships remained, navigation drills, formation flying, and dummy bombing still demanded perfect teamwork. Pilots still had to hold steady, navigators still had to calculate bearings, and gunners still scanned the skies. In peacetime, the drills seemed routine, yet the danger remained. For one navigational error at sea could still bring tragedy, as Flight 19 proved. On a human level, every Avenger crew was a small family. They lived together, trained together, shared meals, and stories of home. In the air, they were not just comrades, but brothers, bound by the thread of life and death. Many American diaries recorded, When flying together, I trusted my crew more than I trusted myself. Thus, the Avenger was never just a machine. It was the story of three men, bound to three roles, three personalities, yet fused into a single soul. A soul that could carry them through clouds of fire or take them together into the ocean's mysterious silence. After the war ended, in the summer of 1945, the massive TBM Avengers were not retired immediately. The U.S. Navy still needed them, not to launch torpedoes at Japanese carriers, but to train new generations of pilots in an age of peace. With its three-man cockpit, the Avenger became a flying classroom, where young men learned navigation, coordination, and survival over the open sea. At Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the roar of Wright R-2600 engines echoed daily. Young pilots climbed into cramped cockpits, bringing both eagerness and anxiety. They learned not only takeoffs and landings, but also the art of navigation, the lifeline skill of Navy pilots. In wartime, one small mistake by a navigator could send a squadron hundreds of miles off course and into enemy fire. In peacetime, the danger remained, for the endless ocean forgave no errors. The training missions were called standardization flights. Among them, Flight 19 was the classic test. 5 Avengers, flying in formation, taking off from Fort Lauderdale, heading out to sea, then making a triangular route before returning. It sounded simple, yet was deeply complex. With no mountains or cities as markers, only sky and silver water, the pilot had to hold steady speed and altitude. The navigator had to track every bearing precisely, and the gunner had to observe the skies and weather. On December 5, 1945, a seemingly calm afternoon turned to tragedy. 5 TBM Avengers rolled down the runway, each carrying 3 men, young cadets fresh from classrooms, now facing real trial. Leading them was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, experienced but unsettled that day. As they took off, no one imagined this would be their last flight. At first, Flight 19's radio signals were clear, but just over an hour later, Taylor's worried voice broke through. "Both my compasses are out. I'm not sure where we are." It was a chilling alarm. Navigators scrambled to recalculate, but confusion spread. Some thought they were over the Florida Keys, others over the Bahamas. Gunners peered at the darkening sky as the wind rose. At Fort Lauderdale, controllers urged, "Fly west, head toward the setting sun." But Taylor, doubting his instruments and maps, continued to wander farther out. Over the radio, desperate arguments rang out. "We're going the wrong way. Turn back." "No. If we turn, we'll end up in the Gulf of Mexico." Time passed. Darkness fell. Fuel gauges dropped into the red. Every man knew that once the engines died, an Avenger could not float long in rough seas. Gunners, once protectors against enemy planes, now sat helpless, staring into the black water below. The final words came faint and broken. "When fuel runs out, prepare to ditch. God help us." Then silence. To rescue them, the Navy sent a PBM Mariner with 13 men. Yet only 20 minutes after takeoff, it too vanished from radar. No wreckage, no bodies were ever found. In a single day, 27 lives, 14 young airmen, and 13 rescuers vanished along with 6 aircraft. What horrified the public was the paradox. The TBM Avenger, famed as the Navy's toughest plane, often limping home riddled with holes, now saw 5 of them vanish without a trace. The tragedy could not be explained by inexperience or weak machines. It was this impossibility that gave birth to the enduring mystery of Flight 19. From that day, the TBM Avenger was remembered not only as a symbol of victory in World War II, but as part of a legend, a flying tomb bound to the Bermuda Triangle, a sea that, to this day, resists explanation. Other Avengers served for years after, even in civilian roles like firefighting and maritime survey. Yet whenever one speaks of the Avenger, memory returns not only to its triumphs against Japanese ships, but also to those 5 Avengers that took off from Fort Lauderdale one December afternoon and never returned. From the very beginning, The TBM Avenger earned the reputation of being one of the U.S. Navy's planes that refused to die. In the fierce battles of the Pacific, it repeatedly proved its almost supernatural durability. Pilots recalled Avengers riddled with dozens of anti-aircraft shells, windshields cracked, wings torn apart, yet still stubbornly flying back to base. Sometimes crews even had to patch the holes with fabric and tape, only for the aircraft to be ready for another mission the very next day. The Avenger's airframe was built under Grumman's Ironworks philosophy, meaning thick steel and aluminum construction, powerful load-bearing frames, and maximum protection for vital systems. Its Wright R2600 engine was designed to endure harsh conditions, withstand extreme heat, and power through long flights. There were even reports of an Avenger losing oil pressure entirely, yet still managing to fly more than 150 kilometers to land safely. For many pilots, the Avenger became like a steel companion that always shielded them. They believed that if any plane could carry them home, after diving into a storm of fire, it would be the Avenger. Its toughness was not only a technical advantage, but also a source of psychological comfort, a reassurance when flying into danger. Yet, Avenger's strength did not make it invincible. The ocean and sky held threats far beyond bullets, disorientation. And this challenge was the harshest of all, one no steel armor could withstand. If steel endurance allowed the Avenger to survive shells, navigation skill was what determined whether a pilot could bring it home. For most people, flying simply meant reading a map and following landmarks. But for Avenger crews over the Pacific or Atlantic, the ordeal was far greater. Before them stretched only endless water and sky, with no visible guide. Avenger pilots had to master magnetic compasses and traditional tools like sextants, stopwatches, and latitude maps. Every calculation demanded near-perfect accuracy. A drift of just 5 degrees over an hour could throw a squadron tens of miles off course. At sea, even a tiny error could mean vanishing into infinity. Within the crew, the navigator radio officer carried the heaviest burden. He constantly compared maps, checked bearings, and relayed commands. Turn 15 degrees north, hold 150 knots. The pilot obeyed, while the gunner kept watch for weather changes. But all of this depended on fragile 1940s instruments, magnetic compasses easily disturbed by natural forces, and radios prone to static or sudden silence. If either failed, the crew was immediately in peril. Records describe pilots panicking as compass needles spun wildly without locking onto a heading. They had to fall back on raw instinct, the sun's position, or the stars. Radios sometimes gave nothing but static, or worse, dead silence. In those moments, the navigator's patience and skill became the thin thread between life and death. Psychological strain only worsened the danger. Most Avenger crews were young men in their 20s, often facing the boundless sea for the first time. They told themselves, "We're on course," but a single voice of doubt could spread panic. A gunner shouting that they were circling aimlessly could spark confusion, even argument in the cockpit. In reality, many post-war Avenger accidents were not caused by enemy fire, but by navigational mistakes. On the vast ocean, running out of fuel meant only one choice: ditching into rough seas. And once the heavy Avenger slammed into the water, survival chances were slim. The massive airframe sank quickly, trapping its crew inside. That was why navigation was taught as the life-or-death subject in every training program. Veteran officers drilled it into cadets. The Avenger will bring you home if you know where you are. But if you get lost, no plane can save you. And that warning became grimly real in the tragedy of Flight 19, where not steel nor firepower, but the chaos of lost bearings caused 5 Avengers to vanish without a trace. On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, Fort Lauderdale bustled as usual. On the runway, 5 TBM Avengers lined up, engines roaring, shaking the ground. This was Flight 19, a standard navigation training exercise for cadet pilots. Each plane carried 3 men: a pilot, a navigator, radio officer, and a gunner. They were young, most barely in their 20s, filled with both eagerness and nerves. To them, the Avenger was a trusted protector. They had heard the stories of Avengers shot to pieces yet limping home, of pilots saved by its steel frame. That belief gave them confidence as they climbed into the cockpits. None could imagine that this routine drill would turn into catastrophe. The squadron commander that day was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot, but burdened by wartime trauma. When the Avengers lifted off into the Atlantic sky, the weather was calm, the sea still. It seemed perfect for training. But barely an hour later, chilling words crackled over the radio. "Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. The sea looks strange. I think we've flown too far east." It was the beginning of disaster. Their only guide, the compass, had failed. Navigators scrambled to recalculate, but confusion reigned. Some swore they were near the Florida Keys. Others insisted they were over the Bahamas. The debate shattered unity. At Fort Lauderdale, controllers pleaded, "Fly west, head toward the setting sun. You'll find land." But Taylor, panicked or distrustful of his instruments, kept leading them deeper into the Atlantic. The cadets, unsure but obedient, followed. They trusted the Avenger, but even the toughest plane was useless without direction. As the sun set, darkness consumed sea and sky. Winds rose, waves churned. In each cramped cockpit, fuel gauges sank into the red. Radios hissed with static, failing to connect. Gunners stared uneasily at the black water below. The final transmission, faint and broken, echoed into the night. "When the fuel runs out, prepare to ditch. God help us." Then silence. The Navy dispatched a PBM Mariner with 13 crewmen to search. But fate was crueler still. Just 20 minutes after takeoff, the Mariner itself vanished from radar. No wreckage, no trace. In one day, 27 men, 14 cadets, and 13 rescuers were gone, swallowed with 6 aircraft. What shocked America was the paradox. The TBM Avenger, famed as the Navy's plane that wouldn't die, had seen 5 of its kind disappear without a trace. No wreckage, no bodies, no logical explanation. Speculation exploded. Some believed Taylor had simply flown them east until fuel ran out. Others blamed magnetic anomalies of the Bermuda Triangle. Scientists proposed sudden storms or Gulf Stream currents sweeping away debris. But all remained conjecture. The truth still lies hidden beneath the sea. Flight 19 left behind a haunting legacy. It transformed the Avenger from a war hero into a mystery. Americans remembered it not just as the plane that helped defeat Japan, but also as the flying tomb of 27 lost men. Fort Lauderdale, once a modern training base, became a symbolic gateway into the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Today, Flight 19 endures not just as tragedy, but as paradox. Steel endurance was powerless against the ocean's immensity, and human skill crumbled before the chaos of lost direction. That is why the story remains eternal, at once a warning and an unsolved mystery that refuses to fade.